Welcome back. Today I have a very special guest that I'm really excited about, Emma Konet. Did I say that correctly?
Yeah. That's right.
So Emma, I saw for the first time on stage. She was a finalist for the Rice Business Plan competition this year in May. And everybody was blown away by her. Actually, before she came on stage, this guy next to me was like, "Have you seen her? Have you seen Emma? She's a firecracker." And I was like, no. So I was like already really hyped to see their presentation. And they really had a top-notch presentation, her and her co-founder, Jacob Mansfield.
Yep.
And they were presenting Tierra Climate. And you won 4th place in the Rice Business Plan competition. Were one of the finalists. Emma has won the Forbes 30 under 30. She's a Forbes 30 under 30 honoree. Her experience comes from 4 years on as a power trader with Citibank. And after which she worked at a battery developer as the director of market strategy and operations. At the Rice Business Plan competition, your startup also won many other awards, since this is the biggest business competition that happens at a college level. So welcome, Emma. I'm really excited to have you here. And perhaps you could start by telling us, what do you do?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. This is really exciting. Very happy to be here. So, I think what Tierra Climate does actually comes a little bit out of a story between, where my career has led me and also where my co-founder Jacobs has led him. And then we kind of met back up because, we've known each other 7 years. We met at Citigroup on the power trading desk right out of college, first job out of college, and kind of like went through the ringer there together and both landed on power desks. And then our paths diverged a bit. And then we both found like 2 sides of a problem that we're solving with this startup, like over the course of our careers. So for me, it was, trading power, working in power markets. Part of my job was trying to figure out how to hedge long-term wind and solar deals, which is very difficult to do with the products that trade liquidly on the exchange or even bilaterally. You end up with kind of this exposure because wind and solar produce in shapes, right? It's not like a fixed production like a natural gas plant. And so that kind of led me to be like, a really interesting solution to this problem that's a physical backstop is a battery, right? Because then a battery can kind of charge up when you have excess production and then discharge when you're short, and then you kind of like smooth that shape out. So I left the bank and went to join a battery developer for that reason, right? I kind of saw problems like, seems like batteries are going to be big to solve this problem. And then worked as a battery developer. And the problems that, it's a super nascent technology, but the problems that I saw on the battery side is that it's actually really just hard for them to like economically pencil out. Wholesale markets aren't designed to pay for carbon-free energy, and batteries are actually a net consumer of power. So their primary benefit to the grid is like power shifting. So it's like, okay, we have a problem here. We need batteries to solve this other problem, but how do we get them paid? And so I was like trying to think of ways where we can kind of juice up the revenues for batteries to make them an attractive investment for like low cost capital. And then the flip side of that coin, my co-founder, he went into the private side from the power desk. He went into origination and started working on these power deals between renewable energy developers and the bank, and basically off-taking wind and solar projects and offloading that to corporate clients like Facebook, Google, whoever's trying to buy renewable energy. And he saw like a host of problems in that space. And I'm happy to talk about that more on this podcast. I kind of have a whole, soapbox on that. But it kind of led us to this point where we were like, I see problems in the power in batteries, and he sees problems in renewable contracts. Can we marry those two things together to create a company that adds a revenue stream to batteries to make them more economically attractive and solves a lot of these pain points for corporates trying to green the grid? And so that's where Tierra Climate was born. It's kind of a long-winded answer. And so, basically what Tierra Climate does is we are sourcing a new class of carbon offsets from grid-scale batteries to compensate batteries for their decarbonization efforts. And so we can actually measure the carbon impact of a grid-scale battery on the power grid, and then we can sell those credits to corporates so that they can retire them against their carbon footprint and manage their carbon emissions. So that's really the marketplace that Tierra Climate's building.
So when, for example, if the windmill isn't running and that your solar panel is not working at nighttime, the batteries kick in and they get compensated for the energy that they're
so
providing.
This is kind of like the fundamental, like this is the thing that I always like to go back to is like, why do we even need batteries? Why do we need them on the power grid? What do they actually do? And you're absolutely right. Wind and solar do not produce on demand, right? They produce whenever the wind's blowing or whenever the sun is shining. And when they're not producing, we have to rely on dispatchable forms of electricity generation. And that's historically been fossil fuels. And so what batteries do is they can charge up on wind and solar power when there's excess production. And then they can discharge when those fuel sources are not available, and they actually displace fossil fuels. And through that displacement, they're basically you're preventing fossil fuels from having to be burned, which prevents carbon emissions. And so we can calculate what the carbon intensity is of the power that you're charging from, and then calculate the carbon intensity of the power that you're displacing, and that difference is what we call a carbon arbitrage. And that's what batteries capture. They capture price arbitrage too, and there's like a lot of nuance, and they are batteries are compensated for the energy they're producing, but they're not compensated for the carbon content of that energy. And so that's what we are looking to do.
And so there are companies that measure like carbon intensity for reporting purposes for like I guess I forget which scope it is. It's either scope 1 or scope 2 emissions, right?
Scope 2,
It's the consumption on a business for the electricity they produce. And the carbon intensity, but people haven't made the leap to how am I going to use this to arbitrage a power storage source? Do you? And it sounds like you calculate the carbon intensity of the grid yourself. Is there a reason why you decided to do that internally versus sourcing it from one of these other companies?
Yeah, so that's actually a really good question. We have a data partner who's doing that for us. So a company called Resurety produces a data set called a locational marginal emissions factor. And they're really unique because they're actually producing this data set at a nodal level, meaning that instead of an emissions factor for the entire state of Texas, they're calculating an emissions factor at each point on the grid where electricity is consumed or generated.
Is my house a node? Is that
your house would be more granular than like the wholesale market, but basically your neighborhood could be a node, right? And anywhere you see, you're driving by, you see like a big power station, that's a node where a bunch of transmission lines are coming together and then getting distributed down and stepped down in voltage. So that we have a data provider, and this is like the culmination of decades of research, and kind of just like we moved from regulated power markets to deregulated price discovery in the 90s, where now we have what's called a locational marginal price, and the power, it's kind of a democratized commodity where we have the price of power being established every 5 minutes by this agency. In Texas, it's ERCOT, Electricity Reliability Council of Texas. So just as that kind of was like years and years and years of like figuring out how this market should work, LMEs, locational marginal emissions, are like in their infancy. And there's been a lot of academic research trying to figure out how do we measure this? How do we exactly show who's like the marginal generator that's providing the next megawatt, or basically the generator that would be displaced if we injected 1 megawatt of renewable energy. Oh, okay. That's how we think of it. Yeah. And so there are several companies that are doing this. Resurety is one of them. Resurety is one that's doing the nodal work and really being geographically specific, which is super important for our application because we need to measure the impact of a battery in a specific place as it's constrained by the transmission around it. So I think that for this company to function, you sort of need a deal maker, which is like what my and Jacob's expertise is in power trading and power markets and battery optimization. And then you need a third-party data source that acts as like kind of a settlement to avoid like a conflict of interest. So that's exactly why we're using a third-party data provider.
And then who's the actual buyer of the service?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We kind of had this theory that it was going to be mostly like big tech companies because they have a history of entering into contracts called power purchase agreements with like wind and solar projects. And so we thought it would be like a natural evolution for them to enter into contracts with batteries. So, but we're kind of finding that we were originally positioning the company in the power space, that we may actually need to be positioning it more as in the carbon markets with like ESG teams who are purchasing carbon offsets, because that's our product is denominated in CO2 tons. And so it's kind of this tension of trying to like marry power markets and carbon markets together. Like they go together inherently. I mean, we know that we're trying to decarbonize the power grid. But how you exactly do that within these massive organizations that have like a power procurement team, and then they have maybe an ESG team, and maybe they don't talk to each other, like Microsoft or Google or Facebook. So that's kind of been an ongoing discovery of like who exactly is the customer. But what's really interesting is we've actually gotten some interest from oil and gas, like cold outreach, which we were not expecting. But being in Houston, I think out of the RBPC, several folks reached out and were like, hey, our oil and gas, upstream firm is looking to invest in carbon capture and sequestration, but we want something to bridge us from where we are now to our CCS goals. And your offset may be a good tool to do that. That's like a little bit more effective than like a nature-based offset, like a tree planting or a forestry project.
Yeah. I'm thinking of like when I was in oil and gas back in the day, and the big trend was like electric frac, right? And you're starting to move to, replacing all the frac spreads that were run by diesel with these big electric motors. But then they got to get them on the grid.
Yeah.
And where the oil fields are and where the grid is, there's not
overlap.
solar, there's no wind.
Yeah.
But there was also an emergent trend of a battery technology being deployed, and a lot of it was because you got to level out what the frac pump needs. There's a lot of shoulders on the frac loading. And I could see if they need to layer that in within their own ESG reporting requirements as a larger oil and gas company, it helps to justify putting in some of these, even these distributed battery systems. And those battery systems were like 1 to 10 megawatts. So small, but they would move around with the frac spread.
Yeah, interesting.
Right? So I was like, I could see how this would definitely coalesce within the industry.
Yeah.
But also just super niche.
Yeah, I know.
In terms of the frac process.
Yeah.
And that's not where you want to build a business that scales. So that's where my head was going.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's interesting you say that. A little anecdote about West Texas is that when I first started powertrain, there's a ton of volatility in West Texas for that exact reason. Like this huge electrical load coming from, Permian development. And they ended up solving it by building a bunch of transmission lines. So that's, but I mean, it's definitely like, I think the oil and gas industry is like, a lot of people write it off as, in terms of like their initiatives to be leaders in like climate change initiatives and clean tech and stuff. But I think that, I mean, they can be big movers, right? And, if we could land a big oil and gas giant, I think it would really be a signal in the industry that like, hey, the power grid is going to be decarbonized at some point, right? And that's through a combination of renewable energy, batteries, and carbon capture and sequestration.
Yeah. So one of the potential customers you did not talk about was like a project developer or the folks deploying like city scale storage today. I assume you've talked to those folks.
Oh,
as
yeah.
well.
So since we're building a marketplace, they're the other side of the equation. So we kind of have to, essentially what we're trying to do is match up buyers and sellers, where the sellers are these developers of grid scale batteries, and the buyers are, the people who are trying to decarbonize their business. And I will say, like, for a battery developer, this is like really enticing. And we're getting a lot of cold inbounds from battery developers. I mean, I'm pretty well connected in the battery space just from my experience working at Key Capture Energy. And the reason why is because like this is a thing that batteries can do, and some are already doing. It's just like this big decarbonization effort, but they're not being compensated for it. They're just doing it for free right now. And what we're trying to do is compensate them for that work that they're doing. And I mean, we're working on a white paper right now. It's actually coming out in a few weeks. And trying to kind of understand the economics of storage, doing carbon abatement versus doing other things on the grid, providing support services, keeping the grid frequency at 60 hertz. There's a bunch of services that a battery can provide. And, if they're not getting paid to do carbon abatement, they're going to do the thing that maximizes the value for the asset. And that doesn't necessarily correspond one-to-one with like pulling carbon off the grid. And so that's one thing we're trying to solve for with this product, is saying, hey, like we're going to pay you for decarbonizing the power grid. And because there's now a price signal on that carbon, it's going to incentivize you away from behavior that in some cases is actually carbon emissive. So it kind of is like two birds, one stone. But the battery developers are very interested because it's essentially going to boost their revenues to a level it's going to like make batteries a more attractive investment. And that's really what we need. I mean, we need to scale batteries by like 30 to 40x to get to net zero by 2050, right?
Yeah.
And like, we're talking about, we have like 10 gigawatts of batteries and we need to get to like 400.
Yeah.
So this is going to be an undertaking, and it's certainly not going to get done exclusively through like procurement mandates from governments or regulatory bodies. It needs to happen through capital markets. And that's really what we're trying to do is make batteries attractive enough to, attract low cost investment and be able to put debt on these projects and project finance them.
So where are you now in terms of your proof of concept? What's your like big milestone that you're going for now?
Yeah, we're very early still. Yeah. So, it's a 2-person company right now. It's me and my co-founder, and we've essentially built an optimization engine and done a lot of work on like the feasibility of this product. Like, can it work? Do the economics work? What's the price that carbon has to be in order to make it work? And it's definitely more expensive than nature-based offsets, which are trading like $4, $5, $6, and ours is like $100. But then on the flip side, CCS is like $500. So there's kind of like we're essentially sitting in the middle there. So yeah, we have done a lot of work on the feasibility of it, and I think at this point we are trying to put together a deal. I mean, most of the we're looking to raise venture capital investment for this company, and a lot of the VCs want to see a proof of concept. And so it's sort of like landing that buyer that is willing to be on the new frontier of a product that doesn't exist, right? And like doing this deal for the first time, finding the battery that's the best fit for that deal. Yeah. And so we're trying to cobble that together and essentially get a deal done. That's where we're at right now. And our hope is that, along the way, we're gonna probably raise a friends and family round to sustain kind of a bridge round. Hopefully hire a couple people and bring some advisors specifically in the carbon markets on board. And then with that collective group, we're hoping to close our first deal by Q1 next year.
So I want to play devil's advocate a little bit. Why do you need venture capital at all? Because in many ways, there's a project finance element to this. And if you're putting a deal together, you're going to get paid for it, right?
Yeah.
So what would be the use of proceeds, I guess, in a venture financing for you?
Sure. Yeah. So I think this is one of those things where it's like an execution play, right? So it's a novel product. It doesn't exist today, and we're creating it. But it's something that can be copied, right? And I think for us, it's like we want to put together like all the kindling and then light the match, and we just need lighter fuel, right? Like we need lighter fluid to just like make the whole thing explode and grow really fast. And so I think that's why we're thinking about VC rather than, right now we're bootstrapped, and we've thought about other avenues to try. We would just grow much more slowly if we tried to grow from, bootstrapping it ourselves and then getting our first deal and then using that revenue to like invest back into the company. It's going to take a lot longer. And like, there's a few, we want to put up barriers to entry and grow fast and kind of build a moat around what we're trying to do. But we also want to do this now because climate change is like happening now. And we're sitting in this heat wave in Texas, like days long, like power grid strained. And it's just like a constant reminder that like this business needs to happen sooner rather than later. And sometimes VC investment is the best way to grow something fast.
That's a good answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How far do you think your the Rice Business Plan Competition Awards are going to get you?
Yeah. So I think that we probably have, so before RBPC, we probably had runway through the end of the year. And some of the RBPC awards are cash, which is great, non-dilutive. And we've actually have quite a bit of non-dilutive capital. We're really grateful for that. Yeah. And then some of the other awards are sort of contingent upon a larger syndicate of investors that we're putting together. So it's like, it's not necessarily like, we're going to write you a check and here you go. It's like, we're going to write you a check with a group of other investors. Like, investors always like to see the business de-risk. No one wants to be the first one to be like, I'm investing and it's just me, So I think with the combination of the RBPC prizes and our friends and family round, angel round this summer, we should hopefully get runway through the end of next year. And then, I mean, our goal is to really just like build up proof of concept and de-risk the business such that when we do go approach institutional capital, it's like we can grow like hockey stick. So that's kind of our approach.
And are you done with your MBA yet, or is it one more year?
Unfortunately not. I have one more year. I am doing the professional program, which is like nights and weekends. It's still like a 2-year MBA and it's the same credits, which Rice definitely like undersells the workload when they recruiting people. But yeah, I mean, I was able to manage it so far in the first year. And luckily, I will be able to get some course credit for the work that I'm doing with my startup to kind of take the load off a little bit. On the
so you are
side.
working full time on your startups and then MBA on the weekends.
Yeah, it's actually I just finished the semester. Since it's like a professional program, we go all the way through basically the end of June. And our summer is really short. And I like don't know what to do with all my free time now. Like now that I'm not in class,
she's gonna work on weekends. Is what I'm hearing.
I know.
Yes.
It's actually it's kind of dangerous. I mean, you can really.
Oh yeah.
Now that I have my nights again for at least 2 months, it's gonna be crazy.
Oh man. So you're doing this full time.
Full time, yeah. I quit my job in early April, because I was working full time for the first semester of school and running a trade desk and was on call a lot, 24/7. Power's 24/7, so you're always dealing with some issue. And I was able to make it work. It's just kind of a little bit of sacrifice.
That cash flow is nice. So tell us about that. When you made that decision, you're like, okay, now's the time. I had to make this jump. How did you feel it?
So I always wanted to start my own company. I always wanted to start a company in energy. And I was playing around with this other idea like for the past 2 years around like electric vehicle, like vehicle to grid type trading, essentially using like distributed vehicles as like virtual power plants, basically, which some people are looking at doing. And there's a lot of reasons why I decided not to pursue that idea. But I have basically been talking myself into this for like 2 years, and it was a long lead up. It wasn't like all of a sudden like, oh yeah, I'm ready to quit my job. But I would say a combination of factors of like talking myself into it. Rice was super helpful because everyone's kind of cheering you on, especially with like, it's ranked 1 in entrepreneurship, and there's a lot of resources just like, hey, like you got to commit, everything's going to be okay when you commit. It's like not as risky as you think. So that was helpful. And then, meeting my co-founder, meeting back up with my co-founder and him being as committed as I was to starting a business. And then I think the last thing, is, I'm married, my husband works, and it, he just got a new job at a bank about 6 months ago and kind of like made the whole benefits thing health insurance thing a little bit easier to swallow. And so like basically stepping away from my corporate job and essentially taking a very limited salary, paying myself a little bit, but not a lot, was a little less risky when you have like a partner. So I'm really grateful for that, for him.
Yeah, no, it's I can imagine it's not an easy decision to take, to make that leap, right? But you said you always had that entrepreneurial bug within you. So now that you've been on it for, let's say, half a year, I would say, yeah. How do you feel? How do you feel? Like what do you think is different? How's it going?
It's going really well. I really like it. I really, really enjoy working on. I mean, I feel like we're working on problems that no one's really thought about, and like it does feel like a new frontier and kind of a cutting edge. I mean, storage is pretty new, and so this is like kind of a layer on top of that. But I will say like the highs are really high and the lows are really low. Every time we get bad news or someone responds to our deck and it's like, this is never gonna work, right? You're like, oh, maybe this isn't gonna work. Maybe I need to go apply for jobs. And I think we've only really had like 1 or 2 of those setbacks where we are really scratching our heads like, can anyone do this? Is it like, we think we can if it's possible, but like maybe this idea just doesn't work, right? And so that's really hard when it's just 2 people. And I think it's really important that like my co-founder and I are like constantly trying to hype each other up and like making sure like we're in this until we hit a block where there is no path around. And like we haven't come to that. And I really hope we don't. And I think I'm pretty confident that we're going to be able to figure out the hurdles. If it was easy to do, someone would have already done it.
Yeah.
So, but then on the flip side of that coin, it's like you get good news and it's just like, it's just pure elation. You're just like, oh my gosh, this is going to work. We're going to change the world. So, I think it's a journey in trying to like level set your emotions so that you just don't go for this like roller coaster that, I mean, can wear you down, wear you out. It's like trying to stay more steady for me.
How was the experience of being part of the RBPC, and what benefit do you think you got from it aside from, winning cash? But I'm sure, being on that stage and getting all these investors and potential customers and people with so much expertise, there's a lot of benefit of that. So how was it after the competition was over? Did you get any calls?
Oh yeah, lots of calls. I think the experience of the RBPC and really like all of the pitch stuff that happens at Rice. I mean, RBPC is one, but there's like the Napier Rice Launch Challenge and like other competitions and like the Summer Venture Studio, which we're participating in this summer. So like a lot of stuff that happens around Rice. And I think for me, the biggest thing is like I had always been really terrified of public speaking. Even something like this would have made me very, very nervous like two years ago. It still makes me a little nervous, but I just kind of got forced to like get in front of big crowds. And I mean, you saw the RBPC crowd was like that, like Shell Auditorium was full, like standing room only. So it's been really helpful to conquer that fear. And now I would say I'm like very comfortable publicly speaking and, really working on like how to command a room and project and be, a presence. That doesn't just come naturally to me. Like I think it's learned. And I think a lot of it was through Rice Resources.
Yeah, no, I actually like that because like I would not have known that about you because you have stage presence, and if anyone's seen you pitch, you're like, you practice. I'm sure you practice a lot. But how did you learn to kind of command the room? Did they have a coach teach you?
I think you kind of get feedback. So like, okay, for example, at the RBPC, the first round we had like a practice round, and it was in a smaller room. I don't know, 15, 20 people. And the biggest feedback was like, Emma's mumbling and Emma is not loud enough. And I was like, oh, wow, okay. That was 2 days before we made the finals and I pitched in Shell.
Wow.
So that's like instantaneous feedback. I was like, okay, I'm just gonna talk until it feels like I'm yelling. And then when someone tells me it's too loud, then that's when I'll stop. And it really is like, it does feel very, very loud to me when I'm having to project like that. I feel like I'm screaming at people, but that's kind of the feedback that I got. And so that's what I did. And it seems to work. And one thing that my co-founder and I do before we go on and like do any sort of pitch competition is we say this thing, whether the weather be cold or whether the weather be hot, we're in this together, whatever the weather, whether we like it or not. And we say that we start off like, I know it's kind of cheesy, but and it's like really, wholesome, I guess. But we like start off whispering that. And then we slowly get louder and louder. We say it a bunch of times until we're essentially like screaming it at each other in like a room. Oh, one of those little like Rice rooms. Yeah. And then you're like, okay, that's what it feels like to talk loud. Yep. Like this is what this is the volume I need to be projecting at. This is like the energy we need to have. And so, you just pick things up like that. Also, my co-founder is in speech and debate all throughout high school and college. So he's like really got all the tips and tricks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man, it's those little rituals. You got to have them because they like those are things you remember too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. It's like, what a great bonding experience. And I can't even imagine that 2 days before you were like mumbling.
Yeah.
And the way you ended up being on stage with like full confidence. Yeah, it was definitely very impressive.
Thank you.
And it's great to know because sometimes, like I go to pitch competitions a lot and I think Jason does too. And you're just like, what's the point of these like 3-minute pitches? Do you really get to know the company? But for someone like you who's just coming out and just being able to get that practice and, being able to at least check that off the list that I'm actually able to pitch. And you said you conquered that fear of public speaking. Not many people can say that in such a short period of time. Now you can focus on actually building something in the technical details because you're like, well, actually I can pitch, I can sell, I can talk on stage. I have conquered that fear. That's huge.
Yeah. I feel like with the like when you're building a business, there are these like conditions you need for success, but any one thing doesn't create success.
Mm.
And when someone has a bad pitch, you look at you look at a team and you go, that person's never raising money, right?
Mm.
And it definitely is a good filter mechanism because people can pitch and not have a business, right? They can have something that's undifferentiated, but you almost need that filter. And I guess the challenge comes to finance ultimately, right?
Yeah.
Like you're experiencing now with the angels coming together, there might be commitments, but they don't want to take finance risk where, you know, they're committing to a plan. If you're raising $1 million, you need all $1 million, right? And they don't want you to raise half and then have to scramble to figure out like, are we going to go halfway? Is it an 80-20 kind of thing? And so they need the confidence that you're going to be able to get the last bit,
Right.
and that kind of ability to create the reality distortion as it is, like gives people confidence that you will get there eventually. But when you see a bad pitch, it's like, I'm not even going to spend time because the idea might be so great, but that person's never going to raise the money, and so it's not worth. Right. And I see that I say that having seen both sides, being in the pitching seat and being a judge. It's you see a lot of bad pitches. So it matters. It does matter.
It does.
Yeah.
It really does. And you know, I'm fortunate that I think through Rice and through my co-founder and just like getting a lot of opportunities to do it. I mean, practice makes perfect, right? Has really helped with that. And like you said, it's now we can buckle down and focus on the business and have pretty high confidence that, you know, when we get the call, we're going to be able to deliver on the pitch.
You'll figure it out. Yeah. So your co-founder is in Boston right now?
He actually just graduated from Harvard Business School, and now he's in New York.
Okay.
His wife is doing a PhD in political science at NYU. So they're in New York based, New York City. So we're kind of doing this bi-coastal thing. But I actually think it's a good breakout because there's a lot of climate investment in New York, and then there's a lot of energy investment in Houston, and we're kind of sitting in between energy and climate.
Where are you registered as a company?
New York.
New York.
Yeah. But we have, you know, registered with, like, we can do business in Texas, so and a couple other states as well. So yeah, we're trying to figure out what the long-term home base is. I think probably not wanting to like, I know my co-founder is not wanting to stay in New York long term. He's from Houston. Went to Rice undergrad. Born and raised here. So yeah, we're figuring out, honestly, I'm a really big proponent of like in-person working, especially for a small team, especially when you're trying to like whiteboard and ideate and like bounce ideas. But with the pandemic changing a lot, there's like, it's hard to get people to come into the office, let alone move to a place. And so as we think of hiring and like where, you know, do we want to try to hire people out of Houston and make the home base here and have it in person? Do we want to try to hire it in New York? What's the best probability of like getting the most amount of people in a room together? Because we definitely can't afford to pay what, like if we're trying to hire someone who lives in Denver and we're like, hey, we need you to move to Houston, Texas. They're gonna be like, yeah, I'm not doing it for that salary, you know, or maybe I'm not doing it at all because everything has changed since the pandemic. So
yeah. In terms of where your buyers and sellers would be, where, you know, if you had any hypotheses on where do you think you should start geographically within the U.S.?
Yeah, so we're definitely, our beachhead market is Texas, is ERCOT, and that is for a few reasons. One, ERCOT has like a lot of renewable energy. This is like, you know, outside of California, it's high wind, high solar. And it's also a very deregulated market, lots of transparency, data access. And there's a lot of storage. There's a lot of storage in the queue. There's over 1 gigawatt, probably close to 1.5 gigawatts at this point already installed. And it's also a market where storage is, some projects are like certainly penciling and like getting done and making money, and some are not. And so there's an opportunity to kind of plug the revenue gap with this product and get projects that maybe wouldn't have otherwise been built because they can essentially increase their revenue stream from this carbon product. So Texas is the game plan. And then in terms of like where we expand from there, I think we're, you know, obviously California is like the hub of storage and renewable energy and like the evolved, you know, clean power grid. But there's a lot of state support in states like California and New York for just like procuring energy storage. And we're trying to target states where there's not state support because we want to, you know, in the middle of the country where there's not going to be big initiatives for clean, renewable energy and energy storage, we're trying to solve that problem through capital markets because we know that there's a willingness to pay for folks to decarbonize businesses and just generally reduce carbon footprint. And so that can be an investment into infrastructure where we otherwise wouldn't see it. Because effectively, the way wholesale markets are designed right now, it's just not enough to get storage anywhere where storage is getting built, with the exception of Texas over the last 1.5 years, which is debatable whether or not those projects are actually making money. And we've looked at the economics. Some of them are just not. It's really hard to justify, especially with supply chains getting all messed up from the pandemic and lithium. There's just this huge demand for batteries in general across all different products, not just grid scale storage. So, lithium prices have been all over the place. So yeah, we're trying to solve for that issue of you're going to have to overpay in order to get storage on the grid. So how do you make that happen? You either mandate it through regulatory policy, or you pay batteries for something that they can provide that no one else can. And a battery can provide you clean dispatchable power and a natural gas plant cannot. So they should be getting paid for that. And that's the kind of the underlying thesis that we have.
So thinking about a thesis, VCs tend to invest in their market thesis. When you talk to the VC community, you're probably you're putting together your friends and family around. Do you find VCs are receptive to this market problem you've identified?
Yeah, actually way more so than angels. So we are talking. So my co-founder, I'll just preface this. I'm chief technology. I do a lot of the coding and the tech stuff. My co-founder is dealing with the fundraise. But I'm going to speak for him right now. He's spoken to a lot of seed stage investors who are very interested, but they comment we always get is you're too early. You're too early. De-risk it. And so we're like, okay, well, we need to de-risk it. So let's go get some money elsewhere. And then we'll come back to these companies that are pretty invested, I would say, in the idea. And they're like, if you can make this work, we're in, basically. And then you go to the angels. And I don't know if this is just Houston or it might just be because Houston is so heavy oil and gas. They
like cash flow. Yeah. That's what they like.
Yeah. It's a lot of oh, you guys are pre-revenue? Yeah, we don't want no part of that. And you're like, you're an angel. What? How? If we had revenue, we would be raising seed money. So I think that's been a little bit of a challenge. And also just, it's a really, even throughout this podcast, I'm sure you guys are there's a lot of stuff that I'm saying that's so niche. It's so esoteric. Power markets are hard commodities markets to learn. And so when you kind of talk to someone who's a traditional energy person and you're like, well, there's all these nuanced problems that we're solving for, and we have to consider this, it kind of is just a little bit yeah, that's maybe too complicated for me. And people are I'm going to step away. So I think it's finding the right investor who at the angel or friends and family round is hey, we believe in the team. The vision makes sense. And then that's kind of how we partner.
Do you think some of the VC thinking has to change about how early they're willing to go? Because they say, okay, you need to be more mature. What does that actually mean?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I think that it actually has, even over the last 5 years, really moved where VCs are starting to get in earlier, which is helpful. I think Series A is now seed and seed is now pre-seed, right? And so you're kind of getting earlier entry from institutional capital. But yeah, I don't know. There's definitely when you're building something like a marketplace, I think it's hard for an institutional investor to write $2 million check when they don't see a proof that this thing can actually work, right? So I kind of get where VCs are coming from when we're having these conversations, and it's certainly not. We didn't expect to be able to go raise institutional capital right out the gate. It's two people with an idea and a white paper and some conversations. But I think we maybe expected the bridge round to be a little bit easier to find. Not that it's, we haven't formally started fundraising yet, so I'm not saying we're not gonna be able to raise capital. I think we will, but I think it's the kind of conversations that we're having where it's how do we find the right fit for the stage that the company is in? Because it's the other thing too is it's not a company where it's oh, go build something in Excel and sell it to someone for $100,000 and then you're de-risked. It's we're talking about $1 billion company on one side and $100 million asset on the other. And we're talking about transacting in a market that has high degree of risk associated, right? Like you can't just screw around in power markets. Like this is a commodity that people depend on for stability, reliability. Like the grid is not something you can just go tinker around in. Like how, there's a lot of regulatory stuff around that.
Yeah.
So it's not a business that you can just stand up like another software company where it's just kind of like, oh yeah, go make a prototype and go have people start playing with it and tell us what you find. It's like, it's a software company, but it's playing in an infrastructure space. And so we kind of have to move at the pace at which that happens. And it's not, we're, generating revenue in 2 months after starting the company, right? It just takes time.
No. And so are you looking at investors outside of Texas then for that?
Yeah. For sure. I mean, we're casting a pretty wide net. I think for friends and family, we probably have enough like high net worth individuals in our personal networks to get us to where we need to be to probably get a proof of concept. And we're also applying for, government grants and stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like institutional capital, it's through my co-founder's HBS network. It's New York, it's Boston, it's California. I mean, we have a lot of friends that are also founders that have gone through like Y Combinator and like are familiar with that space. So yeah, kind of casting a pretty wide net.
Yeah. Would you apply to like a Y Combinator or something?
Yeah.
Like that?
So we did apply.
Okay.
We didn't get in.
What did they say? They don't know what they're talking about.
I don't actually think we got like specific feedback on that.
Okay.
It was just like a generic rejection letter. But I think a lot of people, it takes like 2 or 3 times to apply to get in. And we were also kind of on the fence with YC because it's like you don't want to get into an accelerator too early where you can't actually use the resources that you're going to get from it, and then you just give up 7% of the 10% of the company or whatever. That doesn't really make sense. So it actually might make sense for us to more be in like their winter cohort instead of their summer cohort. So we may apply again. I mean, I have a lot of friends who have gone through it and they were like, yeah, it was great for us. It's like rocket fuel, right?
So when I was telling you earlier, like I miss being like a younger founder because like there would be a time where I could pick up and say I would do like YCOM easily. And now I'm at a point in my life where I could not go for 3 months and do that amount of rigor.
Yeah.
But I've heard it's life-changing. It's fun. Like it's all those things. So yeah, definitely would recommend to anyone because every founder I've known who've gone through it, it's like changed the way they approach things. And a lot of accelerators do that for you.
Yeah. Totally.
Yeah. So, what do we think about, have you had any, like, you talked about some setbacks you had before, like, and where you had like these like down moments. What did you learn from, was there a specific one you're willing to talk about and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, sure. So, basically for carbon offsets, you have to get them registered with these nonprofit carbon registries. And I think like 75% of the offset volume goes through either Verra or Gold Standard. And our data partner has already started the process of standing up a new methodology for storage in order to get carbon offsets sourced from grid scale batteries like registered and verified. But yeah, so I mean that's in process. It hasn't like closed yet, and we're trying to figure out what the timeline is. I mean, some of these processes can take like 1 to 2 years, and so I think they're probably like 8 months into this process so far. But there's some nuance to that methodology that some of it maybe we want to change or we want to think about doing something in a different way, and so that kind of like resets the clock, right? If we want to submit a new methodology, now it's like, okay, got to write it, got to submit it, and then now we might be staring down like 1 to 2 years. And so our original thought was like, we might be able to find an innovator that's willing to do a deal before it's verified, right? Like someone, and this actually did happen. So this transaction has happened one time between Meta and a company, actually a Houston-based company called Broadreach, which is an energy storage developer here in town. And they did a deal of this nature. There's a press release on it. You can go take a look. And we were like, oh, great. So Meta did this without it being verified. So hopefully we'll be able to find someone else or maybe even engage with Meta again on something similar. Kind of, we're trying to like make this a commodity that we can actually like transact on a business and not just have it be like a one-off bilateral transaction. But then in recent months, basically, there's been a lot of heat on nature-based offsets. I don't know if you've seen, they've sold off quite a bit because of claims that they're like kind of bogus or they're over-minted and that they're not real. They're not actually having the carbon impact that they're claiming. And so a lot of companies got this like, hey, you're greenwashing, and got kind of headline risk and, blasted in the news. And so what we're finding now is that really companies are like, no, we're not touching it. If it's not verified, we're not doing it.
Yeah.
And that landscape is, obviously we have no control over kind of that narrative and the way that's gone down over the last year, but it has changed the way we're trying to approach the business. And if it means we can't get to revenue for 1 to 2 years, that's really problematic. Like, how do we leapfrog that?
Yep.
So that, that's actually something we're currently going through right now. It's a current, like, we're like whiteboarding like yesterday, trying to figure out the situation. I think there is, it's like finding creative ways around stuff like that, where maybe we operate under a methodology that does exist and we kind of do it in a limited capacity, or we try to de-risk the deal another way, or maybe we keep trying to find those innovators who may be willing to do this deal on the merits of if we go through the Vera process and say, hey, like, this is what Vera would have us do. Here's all the proof. It's just not yet, doesn't have the rubber stamp. Maybe someone is still willing to do that. But I think it's a lot of just discovering, like, doing customer development, discovering like what your customer is willing to take on. So that's been a challenge, but I think there is ways around it. It's not like a hurdle that I don't think we can jump. I definitely think it's something we can work through. It's just been, a little unfortunate that, the headline risk is kind of coinciding exactly when we're trying to like make this new offset.
And I guess and you have to have time to digest, but some of it is like, how do you change the strategy, right?
Yeah.
If it's not just about revenue today, well, there's still a big market you got to educate and you want to build.
Yeah.
So when that light switch is ready to come on, everyone knows to come to you and not someone else. Right. And so there's still ways to build those barriers, as you were talking about, the moat around yourself. And sometimes the moat is your customer, right? If they're attached to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like what you're saying. I mean, you could figure out the solution to this problem, but then there'll be like other problems, right?
Yeah.
Like with the startup, it's a marathon, and it's how do you maintain that? And it's all about maintaining that energy then and your commitment to what you're doing, because there'll be other things that'll be popping up, and you have to get back into the solution mode again.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, every time I talk to a founder, they're like, yeah, there was a point where we were like, had no idea how we were going to get past this roadblock. And then we just, figured it out or pivoted or whatever. And that's how we got here. And so I try to remind myself that, like, if it was easy, someone else would be doing it. There are barriers that make it hard to get this done, and we just have to figure out how to solve them. So try not to get like discouraged from stuff like that. I think, and a lot of times we'll find like a silver lining. Like we'll be like, oh, this barrier, okay, how do we get over it? And we get over it and we're like, all right, great. Now it's a barrier for someone else to come copy us. So now we know how to do it. And we're going to see if we can use that to our advantage, Yeah.
And sometimes you might solve it and you realize, maybe that wasn't such a big barrier anyways.
Yeah.
It was something we were overthinking.
Right. Yeah, that happens too.
Yeah. Is there something that you've learned about yourself on this journey as an entrepreneur that you didn't know before? Like your strength or something that you don't like to do?
Well, I don't know if I learned this about myself, but I kind of knew this about myself going in, but I don't love having like my calendar taken up by calls and like meetings. And back when I was an individual contributor at Key Capture, I was like developing code and like working on trading, doing fun stuff. And then I became a director, became a manager, started managing a team of like 10, 15 people. And then my calendar was just like entirely meetings after that. I was like a manager. And I was a little worried coming into this that it was going to be a lot of meetings and I wasn't going to have time to actually work on the product and do like technical development. But I lucked out and my co-founder loves doing that. So I'm like, take all the meetings. So actually it's been really good because I've been for the most part had my calendar pretty free to be able to just do heads down work. And I really, I can sit down in front of a computer with some headphones on and crank for like 9 hours uninterrupted. It's like, that's my jam. That's been a pleasant surprise, I would say, about the founder journey. And of course, there are times where we have to jump on calls, but for the most part, Jacob's been handling the intake.
Seems like you have the dream team.
It's definitely a good combo.
You complement each other, and that's what you need, right? Sometimes it's very natural that two people who are exactly the same end up starting a company because they have so much in common.
Yeah.
And that's when you start seeing issues because no one wants to do the other work that they don't like to do, you know?
Right.
Yeah, or the issue is like everyone has like the same decision making area of authority, and it's like you can't get out of the consensus block that you create for
Kind of
yourself.
echo chamber problem.
Yeah.
I will say that is definitely we are Jacob and I are very different, like in pretty much every capacity in our life. And if I didn't know him, I would have been very hesitant to go into business with someone who's so different from me. But because we worked together before, like I knew that I work really well with him. And so I honestly think it's kind of like the best case scenario. Like if I was going to found a company with anyone, I'm glad it's Jacob. Yeah. You know, because part of it is like, I know a lot of folks have founded companies with friends, right? And not to say Jacob and I aren't friends, but we met working, right? And I think if you're best friends with your co-founder, you might feel like you can't push back on their ideas or say like, no, I need to veto this, or like, this is just, we got to think about this differently. Whereas with Jacob, we don't have that problem. Like we, you know, we're friends, we hang out, but like, we don't have a problem giving each other pushback. And I think that's what you need. Like, you just need constant, hey, have we validated that assumption? Or are you just like assuming that that's true? And then it's like, oh yeah, I guess I'm assuming that it's true. Let's go validate it. And if you were just like besties and you're like, yeah, that sounds great, you know, maybe you could find yourself trapped by some of those.
Interesting. Let's talk a little bit about Houston. We're like into our last 10-minute stretch here, so I want to talk about that a little bit. So we talked about like what Rice has done to support you, but are there other things outside of like the Rice ecosystem that you've been able to engage in? Please tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. So the Women's Energy Network is one that I have been engaged with. I actually was on a podcast, the When podcast, which I think is coming out in the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
Talking about batteries and why we need them, and have met some really cool people through When. And then, the Renewable Energy Alliance, Kay McCall has been like great. A huge supporter of me. I'm so grateful for her. Honestly, we met at like a random Rice thing, and we just kind of like hit it off, and she has been a huge supporter of me since then. And so whenever she calls, it's like, hey, can you come speak on this thing? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. So that's been a really cool way to engage with storage folks, but also like wind and solar, which I don't have any experience. Like, it's kind of weird. Most people in storage usually come from renewables and then they get into storage, whereas like I've never worked at a development shop for wind or solar, so I don't have that experience. So that's been really good to talk with those folks, because I mean that's like a huge part of transitioning the power grid. So yeah, I think between like community organizations that are like in renewable energy, it's a great ecosystem. I mean, Houston is definitely like leading the charge on. Like, people love to like hate on Houston, right? Oh, oil and gas. Oh, it's hot there. I'm like, okay, it's nice like 9 months out of the year, 8 months out of the year, and actually Houston is probably one of the leaders, if not the leader, in the renewable energy transition.
Yeah, so. I think we lean in. We're just like, if you're going to hate on us for this, we're going to become the energy transition leaders. We're going to be the air conditioning, capital of the world just because we're hot. So, you know, we're going to take pride in some of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Do you have any favorite spots in Houston that you would want people to know about or not know about because they're your favorites? So like some secret gems, you know, things that you like to do?
Sure. Well, you know, I hang out at the Ion a bunch. That's where I work out of. And I found that to be quite the hub of innovation and just like really cool people working out of there.
Do you actually pay for a common desk, or do you go down and hang out with the like free section downstairs?
I pay for a common desk, but the student membership is only $75 a month, which is like genuinely, I don't know how it's highly subsidized, but it's definitely worth it. So yeah, there's a lot of folks. I run into people I know. I meet new people all the time. So the Ion has been awesome. And then in terms of like, you know, what I do around town, I have to say, since I started school, it's been bare bones extracurricular activities. But my husband and I really like sushi, and there's a couple really cool sushi joints around our house. There's a place in downtown called Kokoro. It's our favorite restaurant. It's amazing. It's in Bravery Chef Hall, kind of off Market Square Park. So yeah, we're always checking out the sushi places.
Good.
New one comes up.
What's your favorite sushi place?
Actually, I haven't found one here yet, because Norway has really good sushi. That's where I was the last 10 years. And so we haven't found a really good one, so we have to try this one out.
Yeah, I would say Kokoro and then Uchi. Uchi is like 10 out of 10. Best It's also very close to our house, so it's a dangerous one. It's like we
Yeah.
can walk to it.
So this is gonna tell you how like food snobby I am. So there's one
Yeah.
called hidden omakase
Yeah,
that we
been
like.
there.
A,
Oh,
it's like hidden.
Yeah.
But then B, don't look at the price. But
Oh,
you should
yeah.
go. You should go once.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's like behind the comic book
Or something
store
like that.
or something,
It's
right?
I don't even remember. You have to like sign up for it like a month ahead
Yeah.
of time because it fills up and they only
Yep.
have 12 spots
Mm.
per night or something like that. But very good.
Yep.
Mm.
But Uchi's fun.
Uchi.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I love
okay.
sitting at the sushi bar over there.
Yeah.
And you get free sushi when you do that. So
Mm.
Yeah.
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 Because one of the things I've noticed, if we're on the topic of sushi,
Yeah.
is that like, you know, in Norway, we would mostly like eat the sashimi or just like the, just the fish, right?
Yeah.
But here, a lot of it's cooked and it's got sauces on it and like all these other things and all these other flavors. And I'm like, I can't taste the fish.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I don't know where to go where they're more kind of, you know, minimalist flavors.
Mm. So I think I read somewhere that the modern like sushi roll is an American invention where it's like all the baked stuff, all
Yeah.
the different flavors. And that's why you don't see it in other parts of the world. It's because it's a fusion food from here.
Yeah.
Mm.
We're a
So-
big fan of just nigiri straight
Yeah.
up.
Yep.
Yeah.
Uchi does a pretty good job with not like overwhelming the flavors, but
Mhm.
I would say MF, if you haven't been to MF, they do like they're I would say more on the minimalist side.
Okay.
Check it out.
Okay,
Yeah,
MF.
Museum District.
Okay.
Nice.
Awesome. Thank you. Now
Little
I know where to
hot
go.
tips on where to get good sushi.
Yeah.
That's what this show's about. No, that's good. Are there any gaps in like the Houston ecosystem? You're like, oh, I wish I had this here, and I don't want to have to go to another city for it.
Like in the clean
Just
tech
in the
space or
ecosystem.
generally speaking?
Yeah, either or.
Okay, well, I'm from the mountains. I grew up in Utah,
Yeah.
and it's pretty flat here. There's not a lot of outdoor activity. I grew up rock climbing and skiing, and so yeah, I kind of miss nature. I think nature is hard to like get into here.
It's too hot.
It's too
too
hot,
humid.
and there's just not. It's just very flat. So we escape for ski trips and hiking trips and stuff. But I will say, caveat to that, Houston underrated 2 international airports, like very close to in town. And so I think Houston's a great place to live. I love living here. And even for its, the things that it doesn't have, like the nature, the hiking, the outdoor stuff, it's like pretty easy to get to somewhere that does.
You could drive to Austin.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess as we're wrapping, do you have anything that the audience can do to help support you in your next steps?
That's a good question. Yeah. So I think it's thinking about the clean energy transition in terms of carbon and not necessarily in terms of renewable energy. Like that's the one thing I really want to get people to start considering is that 1 megawatt of like renewable energy that comes from a solar farm in West Texas is not fungible to like the load in New Jersey or the load, your house turning a light bulb on in Houston. And so I really want people to start questioning the carbon content of their power rather than just saying, oh, I bought a renewable electron and therefore I'm green. Because if we keep that attitude with like renewable energy credits and just purchasing renewable power, not considering how it actually gets to us, we'll never get the power grid transitioned.
Yeah.
And so I really think that it's important for folks to go one step further beyond just how do we get renewable electrons on the grid, but how do we deliver them to end use, the lights in here or, your microwave or whatever, right? So that's part of the education that I think we as a company need to do because it's kind of a new way of thinking about things. But I do think it's really important. And that goes for individuals and companies and anyone who's like has a vested interest in getting like transitioning us to net zero. I think that's going to be a critical key.
I think that's a really good note to end on. I think a really important message because you're right. Most of us don't think about it that way. We think about, we just need more solar and renewables and not about how the energy is actually getting to where it needs to go.
Yeah. So aside from the Ion, where do people find you on the internet?
On the internet. Okay, so we have a website, tierraclimate.com is our company website. And I also have a sort of, I've been honestly not tweeting as much as I used to, but I used to be like kind of bigger on energy Twitter. My handle's Kinetic Energy, and I also have a website,
Nice.
Kinetic Energy.
Oh,
Yeah,
you must
play
be
on the
early
last
on
name.
Twitter.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Konet
Oh,
with my
yes.
last
Your
name,
last name
Ko.
fits it. Okay.
So but yeah, I have a website, and then I also have a LinkedIn blog, and I write about a variety of things. Sometimes storage and clean energy. Sometimes just like what it's like to work at a startup or work, my experience working at a bank. Sometimes stuff that I learn in school. So hopefully people find that interesting. There's like, I have a couple hundred subscribers. So yeah, that's kind of my online footprint. So
Cool. All right, we'll find you there.
cool.
Awesome.
Thanks for being
Well,
here with
thanks
us.
so much for
Yeah.
having me. This has
Thank
been
you so
great.
much.
I love the
Yeah.
conversation.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you
It was
both.
fun.